morning, good afternoon, good evening. There are many people out there who have argued that when Blessed Geza came out in January and denounced the so-called ED 2030 agenda, among other things, as bullshit. The people of Zimbabwe should have rallied round him and joined in the so-called Geza revolution. There are some of us who argued that that would have been a bad move for the simple reason that what Geza was advocating for was a repeat of 2017. In other words, he was advocating that Mnangagwa and his regime should be removed and replaced by VP Chiwenga. VP Chiwenga is just as corrupt, tyrannical, and oppressive as Mnangagwa and Mugabe before him. And the argument was, we really should be looking for solutions to our problems and not always look for the quick fix, which in most cases they turn out to be just kicking the can down the road. And in most of those cases, compounding our problems, not solving them, compounding them. Well, for those who pretended not to know who VP Chiwenga was, here is a video of the drip that has been coming out from the likes of Temba Mliswa, telling us who VP Chiwenga is, for those of us who didn't know him.
Icho, ndicho, Mabviravira times 2. I've come to you once again with an expose on the corrupt activities which is being done, alleged corrupt activities being done between the Vice President, retired General Chiwenga, and his church, the Roman Catholic, in Zimbabwe. And I hope that the Pope is listening to this. I've never known of a church which is corrupt or a church which exposes the Vice President. It's either the two. It's either it is the Vice President, Lieutenant General retired Chiwenga, or the Roman Catholic of Zimbabwe, the diocese, which is leading corruption. The corruption is in this way. 2016, money was paid by 300 people who had bought land in an area called St. Martin's. That's opposite the One Commando Barracks, just boundary with the Catholic University of Zimbabwe, which again has encroached into council land. That's a story for another day. But what has happened is that in 2019, they paid $12,000. And then they paid another $5,000, okay, to add to the 12,000, which means they became the owners of that land. In no time, the Roman Catholic Church of Zimbabwe approached the office of the Vice President, retired General Chiwenga, who is a Roman Catholic person, as we know. That's the church he belongs to take over the residents in that area who had built their homes. I'm talking about building their homes, a house from ground to the bottom, and for them as the Roman Catholic to have a hotel put there, a hospital put there, and a pharmaceutical company. This is land which has already been occupied by 300 residents who have paid 1.6. Okay, and how then do you expect them to move away from the land which they built their houses? The Roman Catholic is a church of the people, is a church of God.
I'll stop it there. I think the details of that is to be established. But the point here is that VP Chiwenga is not squeaky clean. And the idea that we can have somebody like him replace Mnangagwa is as outrageous as the 2017 coup, when it was clear that we are looking at replacing Mugabe with Mnangagwa. Is that the real solution we want? The answer had to be no. We are looking at, we want to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. You do not end it by replacing one dictator with another and perpetuating the dictatorship. And that is exactly what we did in 2017. The many people who came out in the street in support of the coup, they were mistaken. They were misguided, because it was clear that if you come out in big numbers in support of the military coup, they will take it as an endorsement of the coup. And which is exactly what they did. Chiwenga, Mnangagwa, and all those behind the coup took the public support of the coup as a mandate. With the misfortune, of course, of having the opposition leaders themselves as well throwing in their towels. Morgan Tsvangirai left his hospital bed in South Africa in a huff. He couldn't wait to come back to Zimbabwe, because he had been promised that the coup will lead up to the formation of another GNU. While he has been trying, or he and his lieutenants have tried to justify that in terms of, we were hoping that the GNU was going to end the problems in the country. Anyone who was following the GNU would ask, the 2008 to 2013, what democratic reforms did you implement? So if you fail to implement even one token democratic reform, when you had the chance to do so, and when you had the backing of SADC, who is the guarantor of that global political agreement, what chance was there that you would get meaningful reforms in a GNU you agree between yourself and ZANU-PF? No chance. The truth of the matter is, they were hoping that there would be a formation of the new GNU, and they will have their chance to take up their old positions, which they have taken in during the 2008 to 2013 GNU so that they could benefit from the shared spoils of power. That was all they really cared about. There wasn't going to be any change there. So to come back to the 2017 military coup, it was clear that this was an internal ZANU-PF factional war, and whichever side was going to win, it would not dismantle the dictatorship itself. We will just be swapping one dictator with another. And that is exactly what we did. And so the idea of joining Geza revolution, which all it intended to deliver was to remove Mnangagwa and replace him with Chiwenga, was hopeless. We're just kicking the can down the road, replacing one dictator with another. So we had clearly not learned anything from the 2017 blunder, where we did exactly that. So these revelation by the likes of Temba Mliswa about who VP Chiwenga really is should not come as a surprise at all. We all know that Chiwenga was involved in the 2008 electoral coup, and he has never denied his involvement. And we've mentioned that on this platform of how he and Mnangagwa are the ones who orchestrated that electoral coup and told Mugabe, who wanted to leave, that he was going nowhere. To those of you who are not familiar with the story, here is Professor Ivo Mandaza retelling that story.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He phoned Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost the election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, no? So, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it. And the report has never been published, the general's report, to this day. That tells you. Is it complicit behavior? I don't know. But to get back to 2008, the runoff took place. Mugabe was sworn in at midnight before boarding a plane with Mbeki to Sharm el-Sheikh. Ambassador, I forgot to mention that. Yes? I'm not talking about it was contrived, but clearly there was a definite plan to keep Mugabe in office. And it's no secret that I had Thabo speaking the other day, saying the Zimbabwean people came together to form the GNU. It's only half true. Morgan Tsvangirai was literally regimented into the GNU. That's a fact.
I think the important thing here to remember is that Chiwenga and Mnangagwa were behind the 2008 electoral coup. And many people were beaten, raped, had their properties destroyed, and according to some reports, over 500 were murdered. For no other reason than that they dared to exercise their democratic right to a meaningful say in an election and rejected ZANU-PF in 2008. And there is the man that some people are now saying, oh no, we must support him. We must all fall behind him. Like I said, we need solutions to our problems and not be recycling the same problem or compounding it by making the wrong decision. Replacing a dictator with another is not a solution to ending the dictatorship. The dictator you bring in will feel he has the right to rule. You supported him. And it becomes another problem of how to remove him from office, which is exactly what we are facing right now. So I repeat, supporting the so-called Geza revolution would have been a big mistake because it would have solved nothing. If our fight is to end the dictatorship, then replacing one dictator with another is not the solution. Maybe a quick fix in terms of the immediate dictator is out, but it is no solution. We need to think in a more rational way of how to solve our problems. Mnangagwa has become extremely powerful. There's no doubt about it. Corruption, if it was bad during Mugabe's time, has become even worse under Mnangagwa's time. There's been talk of some of the ZANU-PF guys trying to come back. Mnangagwa is reportedly trying to extend his stay in power with this ED 2030 agenda. And one of the advocates who have been pointed out as one of the individuals trying to help him is none other than Professor Jonathan Moyo. And many people have seen him as the prodigal son trying to repent. And I think this cartoon underlines that image very well. Except, of course, that people like him who think they can appease a dictator like Mnangagwa, I say to them, you're wrong. Instead of welcoming the prodigal son, Mnangagwa may not do that at all. And I'll give you one example. Former Minister Walter Mzembi is believed by many to have been conned into returning back to Zimbabwe on the belief that he'll be welcomed back. The last time I heard, he was still in jail. So Mnangagwa is not the welcoming father and forgiving father of the Bible, of the parable of the prodigal son. And to be quite honest, it is ironic, of course, that the likes of Jonathan Moyo should be considered the prodigal son, or all the other G40 leaders who have had to run away for dear life, accused of being corrupt. Because if the truth be told, Mnangagwa himself and all those around him, including Chiwenga, who we were talking about earlier on, are just as corrupt. The 2017 was a factional war in which one faction was fighting the other for dominance. But both factions were equally corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical. Yes, those G40 leaders have found themselves in financial problems, some of them. And as Professor Jonathan Moyo once said himself, it's cold out there. Once you've been booted out of ZANU-PF, you find life is very tough. But I can rest assure you, it is just as tough for the millions of ordinary Zimbabweans living in abject poverty. They have lived in abject poverty for decades now. Where those people try to voice their suffering, the ruling elite turned a blind eye. And this has been the story of Zimbabwe. It is interesting to note that today, the 25th of October, is, according to the SADC calendar, the anti-sanctions day. And Mnangagwa reportedly turned up at one of the anti-sanctions rally with his latest acquisition to his motorcade, the Rolls Royce. I don't know how many SADC nations out there have been celebrating or observing this day, but even they have got to admit that there is something radically wrong in Zimbabwe. Because besides the Rolls Royce for himself, Mnangagwa has been buying fleets of cars for party leaders, for the army, for Women's League, for various Varakashi, for ED, church leaders, etc., etc. The question they've got to ask themselves is, why is it that these sanctions are affecting, are stopping Zimbabwe buying even basic essentials like medicines for their hospitals? And yet, it's not stopping the ZANU-PF ruling elite buy these fleets of vehicles for themselves. This doesn't make any sense. And I hope those leaders will seriously think of how they've been conned into believing that sanctions are the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic problems. Corruption is the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic problems. And our failure to hold free, fair, and credible elections is at the heart of it. Welcome to you, Benjamin.
Good day to you and good day to our viewers.
What do you think of this subject of anti-sanctions? Today we are celebrating 25th of October as the anti-sanctions day.
You know, I think there's no better explanation, than when you see your leaders pledging to buy, 700 motor vehicles, top of the range, luxury motor vehicles, for example, the soldiers, and buying only 10 ambulances nationwide for the whole, the poor to use, because we all know that they don't use, Zimbabwe healthcare. They would rather go and, fly overseas and stuff like that. That just shows the type of leadership that we have. That they have money to spend, but when it comes to delivering services for the people, the problem is the sanctions. Why doesn't the sanctions affect the cars? Why doesn't the sanctions, affect their expenditures, their travel expenditures? It only affects when we need, or when we ask for, for what better services. We're not asking for much. We're not asking, for 5-star, healthcare. We are looking for, acceptable healthcare, where, when you have a problem, it can get, you can get help. to me, this whole sanctions and everybody that supports it, I think, you got to answer the question to say, day before yesterday, we bought cars for the women's league. The previous day, we bought, for ED something, we can afford doing all that. But when it comes to paying wages for the teachers, it becomes sanctions. Zimbabwe is struggling because we are under sanctions. Now they've gone into overdrive. If you say anything that is good about ZANU-PF, you bought a car. That is not a car, a country that is under sanctions, that is struggling with sanctions. When you are finding people buying each other, $300,000, $500,000 car, giving each other $500,000 loans. After 2 weeks, that person there is out of a job. It's a hoax, and unfortunately, there are some not so bright individuals that actually buy into this whole nonsense.
Well, here is the latest of Mnangagwa's motorcade, a Rolls-Royce 2025. Beautiful, amazing. And this is not a cheap car. He is competing with some of the world leaders in well-developed countries. And this is not, it's not as if he didn't have a motorcade. He has. He just wants the very latest, that's all. Zimbabwe has got to realize that we are a failed state. And the reason for our failure, being a failed state, has nothing to do with sanctions. Sanctions have just been used as a convenient scapegoat. Corruption is our biggest problem. And mismanagement of our resources is our biggest problem. And we are not going to get away with it until we seriously address these fundamental problems. And at the present moment, we are just deceiving ourselves, dodging them, pretending they don't exist, pretending the problem is somewhere else, sanctions. The truth of the matter is, corruption under Mnangagwa has gone into overdrive. There was an article a few weeks ago showing that of the country's mineral wealth, only 1% of the revenue from it was going to government. The other 99% was disappearing in the ether. The corrupt few are the ones benefiting from it. In 2023, and we have discussed on this platform, the Al Jazeera Gold Mafia documentary, where of the $2 billion per annum gold mine revenue from our mineral of gold, 80% was being smuggled. And the benefits of that 80%, or $1.6 billion was going to the pockets of those involved, the gold mafias. And in this case here, Mnangagwa himself was named in the documentary. people of Zimbabwe should wake up to the reality that we have a serious problem of bad governance, and it's not going to go away. Benjamin.
I mean, you're talking about the Gold Mafia documentary. That was, I think, a 4-part series, that was showing stage by stage how the top, guys in ZANU PF and so forth are smuggling gold. That was not something that was just, simple to just listen to it and then shelve it. One would have expected, at least the Zimbabwean authorities to come out and say something, or try and find answers, or it was completely ignored to say, there's nothing you can do about it, and fast forward again, you have South African authorities that came, just after Chivayo had that whole election, tender, exposed that Zimbabweans had, Zimbabwean government had just paid money into Wicknell's account, and money started finding its way, into various ZANU-PF, associate accounts, which raised a lot of red flags. And again, Zimbabwe, government never said anything. ZAC, Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, they never said anything. It just shows that this is a country, that has a lot of, corrupt monies that are exchanging hands. And corruption is more rampant now than ever before. So Zimbabwe has got the money to do luxurious, unnecessary spendings. But when it comes to, getting, adequate, resources and facilities for the poor, we are told the problem is sanctions. If we were not under sanctions, we would have gotten you medicine in the hospital, we would have built you schools. But can't you use the money for the luxury cars that are not necessary to do that? It just shows that this is a government that really does not care and has their priorities backwards. And like I said, there are some foolish individuals who actually believe that the country is suffering. Yet, as you can see, fleets of cars are being given away. I find it absurd that you would buy such nonsense and clap hands whilst you see, such corrupt activities happening. $500 million, 500,000 being given to judges and ministers as loans. From that 500, how many schools in the rural areas do you think, just one person, loan, how many schools can we build in the rural areas? Mnangagwa is believed to have used billions of dollars just in the 2023 election run-up, alone. Billions. Buying. That is how ZANU-PF has always been doing it. Bribing, buying support, and all sorts of things. Using taxpayers' money, your money, my money. And then we are told run to say sanctions are killing us. Why are the sanctions not killing the affordability of cars, the travel expenses, the allowances that they're giving each other, the loans? Why is it not affecting that area and just affecting what the public needs? We got to have answers.
Well, I'd like to conclude this discussion with this cartoon. I don't know whether, Ben, you've seen it. It's of our friend, I think supposed to be of our friend, Professor Jonathan Moyo, who many believe is behind this ED 2030, in the sense that he is advising the regime on how they can get around this issue of extending Mnangagwa's stay in power beyond 2028. And many believe that he's behaving like the prodigal son, apologizing to his father and coming back home. I find it hilarious because if he thinks Mnangagwa is the biblical equivalent of the father who is forgiving, I think he's very much mistaken. What do you think?
I think Mzembi can tell him, a few in that regard, because he also believed that, everything was well and forgiven. We're starting on a fresh new page. Bygones be bygones. Now he is languishing in remand prison. It's been documented. Even Mugabe himself spoke out and said, "This guy is not the forgiving type." But my argument with all this is, I have seen presidents that have done far much greater things for their country and have taken their, allocated time within the various constitutions. Some even just went as far as one term, and they are forever remembered. What has this guy done so much that we would break the constitution? We would give so much praise. Amazing. If somebody is to do the proper thing, like fill up hospitals with medicines, buy the resources that are needed for better health care, schools, we will probably have to make him king. Then he dies there because he's done magnificent. I think we, as ZANU-PF, and whoever's got that ZANU-PF mentality, they aim so low that their targets are just, not even a stretch away. It's pathetic, really.
Well, my last remark on this issue would be that the ED 2030 agenda is being pushed, and it has got nothing to do with Mnangagwa delivering the so-called Vision 2030, in which the country is supposed to be an upper middle income nation by that time. The truth of the matter is, there is no sign of economic recovery. And as I said, corruption is more rampant now than it ever was during Mugabe's time. The last year alone, Mnangagwa has spent money hand over fist, buying the loyalties of the war veterans, of the soldiers, of his fellow ZANU-PF leaders, and completely ignore the good of the people. the prosperity of the nation. How anyone at all can believe in Vision 2030 beggars belief. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
In closing, I would want to say, this whole sanction, anti-sanction marches, anti-sanction day, and so forth, whoever even goes on to support such nonsense, is closing their eyes and their mind to the realities that are happening in Zimbabwe. Corruption has been mentioned from within and without. Zimbabwean authorities have been told that you are losing so much because of corruption, and there is no longer any respect towards even the presidency himself, the presidency itself, because the president is actually being surrounded by criminals. We used to say Mugabe was surrounded by criminals, but Mnangagwa is surrounding himself with criminals, literally. And the proof is there. We have the Gold Mafia documentary. We have the South African, authorities raising these, flags and giving them the information, but they refuse to act. So if we can afford 700 cars and blame, sanctions for why we don't have medicines, to me, it's clear. We could easily just switch the two. Let's blame not buying the cars because of the sanctions, and put medicines and build hospitals for the taxpayers. It's very simple. Then we can all go and say, you're stopping our leaders from getting cars. I think that will be fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Those of you who were able to join us, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have the same program, the same time, 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwean time. So we hope you'll be able to join us in the future. It should be every day, but sometimes it's not possible to do it every day, but we try. Thank you again very, very much, Ben, and to everybody, have a good day.